Hello everyone, Dr. Eames here. This time I'd like to talk to you about the information processing model of perception. Now this is a four-stage model and you can see the list here. Um, Really, when we talk about this model, the first three stages are about how we handle the information we get and how we store it. But the final and fourth stage, as you see here, is about how we retrieve that information and use it to make decisions. So let's just get right into it. Um, the first stage is selective attention and comprehension. So this is all about our attention. And handling our attention is a process of becoming aware of something or someone. And we can either focus our attention on our external environment, or we can focus our attention on our memory or go internally within. When we daydream or become distracted, it's really that our attention is shifted from either the environment to our memory or the memory to the environment. Uh, the problem becomes for most of us trying to understand the world around us is that we are continuously bombarded by just a tremendous amount of stimuli. We are exposed to these stimuli constantly from the external environment. A lot of this is marketing messages, but it's all kinds of information, whether it's signage or something on social media or television news or television in general or the radio or in print. Uh, Material was out there clamoring for our attention all the time. And so this tremendous amount of stimuli means that no one can keep it all in and no one can take it all in. And so we use our selective perception to filter out. Now, our selective perception is very important because we use it all the time. If we see something or hear something we don't like, we tend to block it out. And that's really selective perception in action. Um, and this often happens uh, when we're trying to understand something. We don't want to be distracted by things that we don't care about, so we have to block them out. Um, but what generally marketers are trying to do in particular is find ways to break through this barrier of selective perception and reach you, to gather your attention, to capture it somehow so they can get their message across to you, to communicate with you. And so all of these efforts are really what we would call salient stimuli. And they act on our attention and they stand out in different ways trying to capture that. And so we see many outrageous forms of commercial advertising and so forth, promotional pieces that really are designed to capture our attention. Some of them are so successful, they capture our attention, and we may even see the promotional message many times and then still not have a clue about what is the product or the service because we've been so enamored with their presentation and they are so successful at capturing our attention that sometimes it's maybe too successful because we don't always know what they're selling. Now, encoding and simplification is the next step after our attention has been dealt with. Before we can save any type of information in any given situation, we've got to reduce that information to a usable form. And so our minds create cognitive categories, and these are known as schemas. And we put information into these schemas as seems appropriate, and we create new schemas as we deem necessary. So we have schemas in our minds about just about everything in life that we do. We have them about events, we have them about places, and we have them about people, and so forth. And these bits of information go into these various categories, these schemas, as mental images of some type. And within these cognitive categories, we have the various things that we have encountered or situations that are represented in different ways. And so we often have a script for how we repeat some type of behavior. For instance, a schema for going to a restaurant is probably in all of our minds. Particularly, let's make it more specific. When you go to a Mexican restaurant, we know there is a particular sequence of events that generally happens in the same order, but generally we will find those events happening. You go into the door, what's the first thing they do? They ask you how many are in your party, even if there's two of you standing there. They ask you how many are in your party. But they're assuming that, well, maybe other people could show up too. But they ask you how many are in your party. They seat you, they give you a menu. Someone will come back at some point and give you some chips and some salsa. May be the same person, may not be the same person. At some point, a server will come over and take your order. In the meantime, you will sit and wait, you'll eat your chips and salsa, and then your food will come out. That schema is stored in our cognitive memory, and we put it in a place where it's easy to remember and to find it. And so we will adjust these schemas somewhat over time, depending on the experiences we have. And we will put a little more detail in them and so forth. Um, and our mind will fasten a label to these schemas appropriately, the way we think about and whatever the word triggers it when we're talking about that situation or thinking about it. So the restaurant schema would likely go into a cognitive category of going out to eat, something like that. Um, and so, depending on circumstances, you might have several different restaurant schemas in your cognitive categories. That it's different when you go to a Mexican restaurant slightly than, say, comparing it to a Chinese buffet, which is a somewhat different experience in the sequence of events that we can predict and so forth. Um, Obviously, except for the most obvious general schemas, we're going to have many individual variances in our own schemas. And so we might experience an event alongside someone else and then find out that they recall it quite differently and they focused on different things that they memorize and so forth that have stood out to them, that have captured their attention. Um, and we do notice that there are different schemas depending on gender, that we have very different schemas depending on if you're a man or a woman, about life in general, about relationships, about many things. So gender can affect the types of schemas that we have. Again, this is about the selective nature of our perception. And we also tend to put some value judgments on these various schemas that we have and the information in it. When we do that, that's the encoding part, that there's a value attached to it or an emotion or something that seems to bring it to life for us. And so it might be a schema that's related to some happy times or a schema that's related to not so happy times and things like that. Um, so in some scenarios, your schema will be positive, and others it'll be negative, and others it'll be fairly neutral and just mainly informational. And because we are humans, we can be influenced, and certainly we can be influenced when we encode things and store that information. We can get it wrong. And this is exactly what happens when we store information that is stereotypical in nature. But that's for another discussion. Um, when it comes to storage and retention, we're still talking about how we handle this information, how we get it and perceive it and store it and so forth. Um, So when we talk about storage and retention, we're really talking about putting that information into long-term memory. Now, long-term memory is divided up into our cognitive categories. And these cognitive categories, of course, like I've explained, contain our schemas. The cognitive categories are divided into the three parts you see here. Um, Event memory, semantic memory, and person memory. Now, event memory is just what it sounds like. It contains information about specific and general events that you've observed or participated in or read about and so forth. A lot of these event memories will be very much like the script that I described in the restaurant schema. Things will proceed in steps like a process or unfold like a story and so forth. And we've put flavorful information in there that's associated with that schema, remember. It might be emotional and might be whatever, something that's a key that's linked to it. So we'll have our variety of schemas like going to the restaurant or going to the movies, and it'll have, in these schemas, we'll find both very general information, but we'll also find very specific information like I've described. And so the event memories, depending on our attention and how much we've focused our attention on the event at that time, or if it's a new event, if it's the first time, how deeply we've thought about it, that will determine the level of detail, whether it's general detail or fine details. Now, our semantic memory is general knowledge about the world. Our semantic memory generally functions as a sort of a repository for everything we know about concepts. And concepts are more general in so many ways than event memories, which are specific tied in time and place to something, but concepts are different. And so our semantic memory stores concepts. Concepts are the way we think about things or things that we're trying to understand, something like that. We store the concept memories in schemas just like we do event memory. Now, the long term, the third type of storage and retention here is person memory. And we store information simply here about individuals and about groups of individuals. So person memory is where everything is stored about your family, about your peers that you interact with, those people in your in-groups. But it's also a place where we store stereotypical information about particular groups of people and so forth. Now, when we talk about retrieval and response, this is a little bit different. We're not talking about managing the information, paying attention to it, categorizing it, and storing it. We're talking about pulling it back up so we can use it in some way. So when we need to make judgments or respond to something, generally the first thing most humans do is quickly in our minds, we're rifling through our schemas to find the ones that would be most appropriate to give us information to help us understand the situation. So we retrieve the information we need from our long-term memory. It's in those cognitive categories. So we draw that information from the three main categories of event memory, of semantics, and person memory. And then we interpret those memories and we integrate them in ways that help us come up with a response, a useful way to make some use of that memory, that information in a way that'll apply to the current situation. Okay, folks, that's all I wanted to talk about this time. I'll talk to you again soon.